I say this every single episode, and I know it sounds cliche, but I think it's funny how episode after episode of Digging Star Wars, I am always more excited than the previous episode. But this particular episode proves to me that there are things lining up beyond my control that I just got to let happen.
You're listening to Digging Star Wars, your online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga. Here's your host, Chris Mich.
I am thrilled to be sitting here with fellow writer-producer, but more importantly, a very good friend, returning guest, Mr. Peter Fey.
The force is strong with you on this one, Chris Mich.
I don't want to sound like I'm patting myself or we're patting ourselves on the back, but you know, for those that listen to the Saving Private Ryan episode, my guest Mike Salome, we talked a great deal about, isn't it funny how things just line up? Because you know, when I did Saving Private Ryan and I approached Mike as my guest, I had no idea of the story he was working on with Arlington Cemetery and whatnot, and for Unsung Philly, and that was cool. And when I first started digging Star Wars, I knew there was two films before I did any research. There's going to be two films I was going to talk about. Hidden Fortress, which had to be the first film, and The Dam Busters was the other. And I just purposely said, I'm going to wait to do The Dam Busters because I want to figure out the format. I want to figure out what I'm doing, and I want to give this film due. When I mentioned it to you, I got a very, I kind of got the eyebrow raising of interest, like, it's kind of interesting. And then I saw you, after you watched the film and researched it, like your energy level got higher and higher, and which, of course, is contagious. So when you brought in our special guest, Mark Forshaw, you mentioned, like, hey, he's a friend of mine. We were at a soccer game. I mentioned Dam Busters, and Mark got so excited because is it his favorite film? Or one of his favorites, I guess?
I don't know that it is his favorite film, but you could just see that it meant so much to him. His first thing he says, I have a black lab because of that film.
Right. When I heard that initially, I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And then when I sat here earlier today in this recording session and Mark told his story, I got chills. And I feel like I'm throwing out cliches, but it's the God's honest truth. Like, I got chills thinking, how crazy is this that these things just line up like this? And I think it's very cool. A little backstory on the Dam Busters, why this was one of the films. Everyone's hit over the head with Hidden Fortress, and by all means they should be, because that's a beautiful, excellent film and certainly inspired Mr. Lucas to make the Star Wars films. The Dam Busters, the reason that popped up was way back in the day, I guess circa 1983. I collected a lot of Starlog magazines because, of course, Jedi was out, and I was reading anything I could. And there was a cartoon in Starlog of a dad sitting on the couch watching Star Wars films. And I say circa 1983. It might have been a little later. But at any rate, they're watching. It's a dad and his kids watching Star Wars. And the dad is pontificating to his kids like, oh, this is where they ripped off Hidden Fortress, and this is where they ripped off the Dam Busters, and this is where they ripped off whatever. And that was that was the very beginning of digging Star Wars. You being the good list maker and digger that you are, and in that male gene of needing to know everything. That's great. Yeah, like I remember seeing that cartoon and being like, what's that all about? Yeah. And that sparked the interest in film. I think that was the beginning of my film history obsession. Yeah. And I thought it was so cool. And when I rented the Dam Busters from Video Village back in the day and watched it, I had I don't even know the right word. Is it a myriad of emotion? Is it a dramatic collision of emotion? Like, I was both happy, excited, and angry because I thought, my God, this is a beautiful film and this is great. And Lucas ripped it off. That was my initial feeling. Like, he ripped it off. And then, as time goes on and you kind of mellow out, you're like, well, this is cool. He pointed me to a film I never would have seen. I never would have found out. And that's certainly the spirit of digging Star Wars, is I want to point you to films that you may have overlooked. One thing, Chris, that in all the research I did, and I did do a lot of research because I was very excited about this, many articles saying
George Lucas has never, ever acknowledged the Dam Busters. Now, you may have info to the contrary because, you're the uber expert. But a couple have said, like, oh, he never mentioned, he never references, never. So, that said, there are things in here that
blatantly are the Dam Busters.
Yes. Yeah. And intentional, I don't know. No one will ever know. But they're there in 1955 and they're there in 1977.
Right. It's funny because when I'm choosing the films, I have various ways of choosing which film falls with which Star Wars film and the level of excitement. And I was excited about Dam Busters, and I was a little worried how other people would react to this film. It is an older film, and it is a film that moves at a slower pace, and I hope I don't scare people off when I say that. But keep in mind, this is a film based on a true event, factual events, and it is an amazing film. And then when you bring in Mark's point of view, suddenly I realized this is why films are important. This is why art is important, because it can mean so much to different people around the globe.
I was born in Liverpool, England. I was an army reservist in a Liverpool regiment for just 10 months or so, but I come from a Royal Air Force family. My father, Charles Forshaw, served in the Royal Air Force between 1941 and 1948, and his role was, first of all, protecting airfields in eastern England, and then during the campaign in Northern Europe, it was going forward in armoured cars to seize airfields, so he was interacting with pilots and aircraft constantly.
You told me your father recently celebrated his...
My father was turned 90 in June, yeah.
That's great. Do you have any particular recollection as a child, the first time you may have seen Dam Busters?
I must have been less than 10, because the Dam Busters film is one of those films that we say in Britain is a Christmas movie. Every Christmas it comes around. It's either that or The Great Escape. So seeing Dam Busters is, for my generation, frankly, really anybody over the age of 35 has seen the Dam Busters at least 1 to 5 times.
And did your father have any particular thought about it, or is that something that maybe he was too near to?
Well, my father's attitude towards war films is that they really don't capture reality. It's an incredibly hard thing to capture. As he said, there's no such thing as a still battlefield after a battle. Bodies twitch and such like. And so he would never be disdainful of films, particularly like the Dam Busters, which is almost part of the British psyche in some ways. I mean, it's even used and sung on terraces. The theme is sung on terraces at big soccer games, and people actually stretch out their arms. And I remember one instance that when England were playing Germany in a soccer match, and we beat Germany 5-1, towards the end, in Germany, there must have been about 10,000 men with their arms stretched out, acting like aircraft, all singing the Dam Busters tune, which wasn't particularly politically correct, but it was, quite funny from a British point of view.
What was your first experience of a Star Wars movie?
It was 1977 when it first came to the UK, and my father begrudgingly took my brother and I, so I was 12 and he was 10, and he begrudgingly took us to see Star Wars, thinking, well, science fiction really is not of his generation at all. However, at the very end of it, my brother and I were getting up to go, and he was rooted to the spot, literally with his jaw wide open, because the last time he'd seen a science fiction film would have been the original Flash Gordon with Buster Crabbe in the 1930s, and then suddenly went from that to seeing Star Wars, and I think it impacted him as much as it did my brother and I.
Now, as a 12-year-old seeing Star Wars, were you swept up in it, taken away by it? Was it just another film?
Well, I went out and bought the album of the music for it, so certainly of that, and I've carried it on to my son and encouraging him in purchasing the as much Star Wars Lego as possible. So I'm living it all over again.
And funding future films, hopefully.
Yeah.
Since you had seen Dam Busters at an early age, and it obviously had a tremendous influence on the third act of the first Star Wars film, did you make that connection when you were watching Star Wars in the theater? Did it register as, I've seen this before? Did it feel like you were watching something that was like a science fiction version of Dam Busters, or no?
I'm not sure if I did when I was 12, but I certainly did feel that later on. Particularly that scene when they're in the final scene is going down that trench within the Death Star, and that it reminded me of a couple of films. So it reminded me of the Dam Busters, of the 633 Squadron, and also certain the fight scenes around it. I remember reading that the influence of another war film that I think one of my favorite films is the Battle of Britain. And those scenes in there, and when I read that, I thought, oh yeah, absolutely, and there's a definite connection there. But that trench scene is definitely, Dam Busters and 633 Squadron.
I loved the story you were sharing about the soccer games. When I first heard that you had that experience, I equated it. Peter and I grew up in the Philadelphia area here in the States, so it's almost law that we watch Rocky, and at every sporting event they're going to play the Rocky theme. And growing up was very frustrating because Rocky lost. Do you feel that that's a good connection? Like you were saying, like if you grew up in your area and you're of this age group, you saw Dam Busters, the theme song. Is that does that ring true, you think, as far as like what I'm saying, as far as growing up in Philly with the Rocky films?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. I think in my generation, if it was either your father or your grandfather, any grandparents, your grandmother or your mother that was involved in the Second World War. And the Dam Busters is one of the major films. Where was it? Very early, mid-50s, 54 was it? 54, 55, less than 10 years after the end of the war. And it did become part of the psyche. There's been, comedy takeoffs of it as late as the late 1980s. It is that kind of cultural yardstick that's there. So, yeah, most definitely it is. In many ways, for British people, it's like the Rocky film is for Philadelphia.
And the spoiler alert, if you don't know, England won World War II. Why is it so beloved to the British? What is the significance of the story?
Yeah, there's a number of issues that are very very significant for us. First of all, it was filmed and it was set rather in I believe it's either 1942 or 1943, and the only way that Britain and America was entering their the troops and the planes had begun to move over to the UK is that Britain was really the only way we could take the war to Germany was through Bomber Command. And the bravery of these very young men. I mean, the pilot, the main squadron leader, the main guy leading the flight was Guy Gibson, and he was 24 when this took place. He would be awarded the Victoria Cross, which was the equivalent of the Medal of Honor, and very rarely handed out the Victoria Cross. I think it's more than 50% of all the flight crews were killed for Bomber Command. So it was at a time when it was the only way we had to take the war to the Nazis. So in that way, it's still fresh in Britain. I mean, Bomber Command has only this year has had a memorial put up to them in London because a lot of controversy about the major area bombing because the bombing sites weren't that good, and that's striking about the Dam Busters is one of the very specific examples of targeted bombing, of really precision bombing, and that the risk that the bomber crews put themselves at that was disproportionate, even to the area bombing, which itself was incredibly dangerous when 50% of the crews didn't come home. So there's layer upon layer of bravery, these incredible brave guys, but then they went that extra level into bombing those 3 dams in Germany.
Yeah. So you're from Liverpool.
Yeah.
Do you know the Pacemakers?
Jerry.
And I can attest to the fact that Mr. Forshaw is from the red half of Liverpool.
Yep, Liverpool Football Club.
That's right, as we recently went to watch them in Baltimore, which was great. So you have some experience in the military, 10 months, and your brother who attended that film with you, what does he do now?
Well, he's now a wing commander in the Royal Air Force, which is the equivalent of a colonel. He served in Iraq, and So then he's following the family business, following my father into the Royal Air Force, yeah. And continues to have a very keen interest in science fiction films, yeah.
Awesome.
Mark, I want to thank you very much for your time today and for taking the opportunity to not only share your knowledge of Dam Busters, but a lot of your personal history, because that's what makes a podcast like this very interesting. So I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Welcome back to Digging Star Wars. Here's Chris Mich.
Well, I almost don't know how to react to that because I'm really blown away by Mark's account. Like, first of all, I'm blown away that Dam Busters is that important to people who grew up in his generation and in the UK, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And the connection that he has, obviously, with his dad in World War II, and his brother being in the service now, and it plays over generations. You know, we had said after we'd had Mark sit here at the mic and walked away, I said to Peter off mic, if we went looking for someone like that, we never would have found them.
Right, and the funny thing was, when I thought, hey, let's get Mark in here, it was only because of
his reaction to the movie.
His reaction when I mentioned, I just watched this film, Dam Busters. Well, Dam Busters. So, so this is our man. And then, only in the last couple of weeks have I learned, because he went to England for his father's 90th birthday, that, what role he played in the war.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing and very cool and just kind of humbling too, that thank God there were guys like that then.
Yeah, really. Absolutely. Absolutely. So right off the bat, there's a few things, before we get into the nitty gritty of everything I want to put out there. Should you watch this film? Absolutely. If you're a Star Wars fan, it is required that you watch this movie. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're a fan of great World War II films, this one is not long after that event, and it's really great.
Yeah. So that's a given. As we go forward in the episode, there are going to be spoilers. That's what we do here. We talk about the film. You need to know that a part of the film deals with the main character's dog. It's a beautiful black lab.
Yes.
And the lab has a very interesting name that I'm not going to say here in the podcast.
Taken from the Latin.
Yes. But most people hearing it would consider it a racial slur.
Yes, these days, yeah.
Yes. So that being said, I want to caution you if you're, hey, son, we're going to sit down and watch this movie because you're going to have some explaining to do. Right. I want to throw that out there to our listeners that if you're going to sit down and watch this with kids, you need to be prepared to talk about that.
Right.
And I just want to throw...
And that the dog is named 12 times in the course of the film.
Yeah. So there's a whole scene where literally the scene is the dog going up to different characters in the film and the character saying this dog's name.
Yeah. One of the code words at the end of the film to convey certain information is the dog's name.
Yeah, so it's something that I feel obligated to throw out there.
Dam Busters is a British film, and this is from the British Film Institute Screen Online. Adapted from Guy Gibson's own book, Enemy Coast Ahead, Michael Anderson's 1954 docudrama captures the tension and bravery of this audacious raid on the center of Nazi Germany's industrial complex, and the quintessentially English combination of inventiveness and dogged determination. Split into two distinct sections, it deals first with the fraught but ultimately successful development of a new weapon, and the second and pacier section deals with the mission itself and its associated costs for the enemy and for the British airmen.
That's a very well-written synopsis about the film, and I think it tells you the story without giving too much away. Why don't you take this opportunity to tell us a little more about the significance of this film, what you found in your research?
The Dam Busters was nominated for an Oscar for Best Special Effects. Now,
Wow.
keep in mind, it's 1955, and I can safely tell you now that some of the effects are not at all that good.
Right.
Certainly by our standards.
They're the best
today.
miniature, looking like miniature effects.
It's not even that. It's more the hand-drawn flak and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but you know what? It's okay because it's exciting.
Yeah.
So don't diss on it for that. It was also nominated for BAFTAs for Best British Film, Best British Screenplay, and Best Film from Any Source. And it went empty-handed all around.
Really?
But in 2005, Channel 4 did a poll of viewers to find the 100 greatest war films. And Dam Busters finished 11th.
Wow.
Okay, now it was beaten by Bridge on the River Kwai, Black Hawk Down, Zulu, A Bridge Too Far, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Schindler's List, The Great Escape, Apocalypse Now, and Saving Private Ryan.
Wow. It came right after Saving Private Ryan.
Actually, Saving Private Ryan finished first.
Really?
That topped their list.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was your most recent.
It was.
The cast. Richard Todd stars as Wing Commander Guy Gibson. And Guy Gibson was the 24-year-old pilot who was tasked to assemble this special squadron. And here is Mark Forshaw with a very interesting fact about that actor.
So Richard Todd, who plays Guy Gibson, the main pilot, commanding officer in the raid, he himself was a war veteran in the Second World War and a very brave one. He was part of the parachute landings at D-Day that took place at night and had the job of securing a very important bridge, so important that they later named it after the symbol of the parachute airborne division, Pegasus. It's now called Pegasus Bridge. And so important that it was actually featured in the film The Longest Day. And in that film, he plays his commanding officer, a major who secured the bridge, and somebody else plays Richard Todd as a captain. For that was what rank he was when they were securing the bridge. So here's a man who knew conflict, up front, very much so, and then went on to play a number of war film roles, including Guy Gibson.
Michael Redgrave, father of Vanessa and Lynn Redgrave, famous actresses, starred as Dr. Barnes Wallace, originator of the theoretical bomb and the guy who brought it to reality. Ursula Jeans played his wife.
With a very interesting hairstyle.
Well, she had Princess Leia buns.
Just saying.
And hair. So that was your first connection.
Yes, right.
There's a couple of guys that appear uncredited. Robert Shaw, actually he was credited as Flight Sergeant John Pulford, RAF. He was the flight engineer on one of the flights. You can see him in a couple of scenes. I know I pointed him out to you. I said, Chris, who's this guy?
And of course I failed miserably.
Well, I didn't expect you to get it, but tell the truth though, once I told you who it was, you're like, absolutely.
Yes.
It just looked like Robert Shaw with a big head of black hair.
Yeah.
Patrick McGowan, who was the prisoner, is uncredited as an RAF guard, and his only lines are spoken to Gibson's dog. I always thought he was English. He was actually an American-born actor brought up in Ireland and England. So that's pretty interesting.
That's pretty cool. So this film was directed by Michael Anderson, and he has a pretty interesting filmography. I don't know if you had a chance to look at some of his titles, but I guess most recognizable was the fact that he directed Logan's Run, which I think that's pretty cool.
And had a big hit with Logan's Run.
Yeah, absolutely. And his list, I'm looking at his filmography now. I mean, anyone can go to IMDb and pull it up. But it's pretty impressive. What's interesting is he entered the motion picture industry as an errand boy at England's Elstree Studios. Now, for those of you who may not know the significance of Elstree Studios with the Star Wars saga, all 3 of the original trilogy pictures were filmed at Elstree Studios.
That's right.
I think that's pretty cool that Michael Anderson got his start there, and that's a very Star Wars studio. On a much more minor note, but one I want to point out nonetheless, he also served as unit production manager on the film In Which We Serve.
Oh.
Which, ironically enough, we've mentioned in the previous episode that featured Peter as a guest for Lawrence of Arabia, because David Lean, the great David Lean, that was his first directorial effort. Yeah. He co-directed it with Noel Coward. So I thought it was cool that here is another filmmaker down the line of digging Star Wars filmmakers, and there's that connection.
Let me add to that Mr. Anderson was also a Best Director nominee for another film, 1956, Around the World in 80 Days, and he
his
was
his most successful film. Many people say,
yeah, like you mean critically?
Yes,
or, yeah. And because he was born in January 30th of 1920, and thank goodness is still with us as of this recording, he is the oldest living Best Director nominee.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
That and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee, but I think that's pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah, and you had mentioned Logan's Run, which is great. He was the first guy to do a cinematic version of 1984. And
look at that, a Bowie reference too.
Yeah, there you go. Which it was also the same year as Around the World in 80 Days, so I thought that was pretty cool. And he did in 1968 directed The Shoes of the Fisherman, starring Anthony Quinn, Laurence Olivier, and John Gielgud. And
for those of you who like 80s trivia, I think it's interesting that a film he directed in 1960 was called All the Fine Young Cannibals, which of course is where Fine Young Cannibals got their name. Awesome. So it is awesome. It is. And so, I mean, it's funny how just looking up a film like The Dam Busters, kind of you dig up all these little jewels of information, which are very cool.
You are digging, my friend.
Yes, we are digging deep.
This is Digging Star Wars.
Okay, we're going to get into talking about just what Lucas borrowed from the Dam Busters, and I put borrowed in italics and quotes and highlighted it in different color. The film should stand alone, definitely.
It does.
And it does. But when we were watching this again, and I'm just going to go in order of how I discovered these things in the film, because it all builds up to that climactic ending, which a lot of people may or may not know. But even the beginning of the film, The Dam Busters, starts in the heavens. It starts with titles and placards in the clouds, and there's a placard of information, and instantly I thought of Star Wars. It starts, with the logo and the stars, and then you got the scroll going off into infinity,
you're right.
And it pretty much establishes this is the forum for warfare. This is the theater of the war you're going to see.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, I know I'm hitting it on the nose with Star Wars. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out you should see a star field at the beginning of a film called Star Wars. But that's what the Dam Busters does. Right in the top, this is an aerial war film. Get that in your head. We're in the clouds. And it hung in there. Like, it wasn't just one shot. It was one shot, the titles, this placard of information, how you get into the story. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Both films, Chris, in my humble opinion, have this element of very gritty realism. The Dam Busters' black and white cinematography is coupled with actual test footage of these bombs being dropped from the Lancasters. In a way, and I don't know if this was fully by intent or fully by the fact that they're making a film 9 years after the war, and hey, well, we've got this test footage, let's use it. But the beauty of that is it makes it feel like a documentary. It has a documentary feel, not unlike what you might see on the History Channel today of a recreation of something.
And that certainly carries over to A New Hope. Is that where you're going with this?
That's exactly it, because as I said, to my mind, New Hope has the most organic feel of all the Star Wars films. It's lived in. It feels like a real universe. I remember when I first saw it at the Eric Pilgrim Gardens and coming out in the afternoon, just being depressed that I was still on Earth, because I really felt like, that I'm there, and I don't want to knock the later films that are in their own way equally visually stunning, but to my mind, this was a really visceral reality.
Well, at the heart, I think Lucas is a frustrated documentarian, and he admits that. I mean, that's how he got into the film industry. He was shooting behind-the-scenes stuff on Coppola's work and whatnot, and Yeah, sure, he did some avant-garde shorts. I'm not belittling that, but when you watch his early
a
work,
lot of handheld stuff.
American Graffiti is a documentary practically.
Right.
THX 1138 is like a documentary of a future society,
Right.
more or less. I mean, again, I'm using the word documentary loosely, but it's in documentary style.
Exactly.
And I will say this, that A New Hope, out of the 3 original trilogy films, the classic trilogy, yes, A New Hope certainly still carries that early Lucas feel, perfected and the way it should be. It's not too much, it's not too little, but it's nice that he revisited that come the prequels.
Right, but again, in terms of 4, it has that feel because that's what they had. That's how they could shoot it. That was that was
the limitations of what they had, and they worked with the limitations
and what
they had.
he knew, and
which is what you're saying with the Dam Busters. Here's this test footage.
Right.
Well, why wouldn't we use it? We don't have to shoot that sequence.
Early on in the Dam Busters, Chris, Wallace illustrates how his bomb would work by drawing its trajectory on a cutaway sketch of a dam. The bomb goes down and it sort of radiates its explosion outward, and it looks a lot like the animated visual at the briefing before the attack run on the Death Star.
Right. It's just so funny because when he starts drawing, that was the first time in the course of the film, like, I mentioned the clouds and everything else, but like I got chills when I saw him starting to sketch that thing, because you think of that wonderful limited 2D computer animation.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like, it's not when they plug into R2 in A New Hope. I think it's when they're actually in the briefing room with the pilots.
Yeah.
And it's like, and those of you who have watched New Hope a billion times like I have, when you hear that doot, 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 and the thing radiates out, you're like, oh, that's it. So it's really cool that was from Dam Busters. There's this great sequence of the bombers getting ready, and getting into the ships, and they're firing up the propellers, and you see like the ground crew, and it is total Yavin base. Like there's guys running around. Now, granted, like every war film has that, but like that is very, very, like when you're watching the way it's cut and everything else, it's like, dude, that's Yavin. That's totally Yavin. Another interesting thing is that once Wallace has the go-ahead and they have the planes and they can do these testing runs whenever, you start seeing the inside of these bombers, which is very exciting the way the film's structured out, but there's always the shot behind the pilot looking out the canopy, and it looks a lot like the canopy in the Millennium Falcon.
It does, yeah.
Like just the way where the camera's situated and how it's, it's a rear projection screen in front of the canopy for the shots and stuff.
Right.
You like they could have thrown the Death Star in front of that canopy and you would buy it.
That's
so
right.
I thought that was pretty cool.
Or put Han Solo in Dam Busters.
Well, that's the thing too, is that the Guy Gibson, even throughout the film, will wear a black type vest occasionally. It's very Han Solo. I mean, it looks cool. It just looks like something a pilot would wear.
Right.
And it's just very cool.
So the attack on the Death Star in the climax of Star Wars, as us old people call it, as we all know, is heavily influenced by the actual World War II footage and later World War II films, one of which I was surprised to learn was Tora Tora Tora, which was as late as 1970. Of course, 633 Squadron and the climactic sequence in Dam Busters. Chris!
Jeez, wow. All right, so you get through these other little asides. You're like, yeah, big deal, Chris. This is not a big Star Wars influence film,
but it is.
Yeah. Oh, you shut your mouth, because I'm going to tell it to you right now. When you get to the final act of Dam Busters, it is insane, and you can even pull up the last 10 minutes or whatever or I should say 10 minutes of the trench run on YouTube. There's many Dam Buster videos on YouTube
after this podcast.
Yeah. Thank you very much. After this podcast, however, the end trench run is or I should say the end river run, when they're actually running down the rivers and bombing the dams, has so many Star Wars references in visuals, camera movement, lighting, dialogue, character names. It's insane. So I'm going to do my best to cover most of them, and Peter's going to interject and throw things out. But, I mean,
I just want to say that I enjoyed when we watched this out of the corner of my eye, seeing you scribble furiously.
I was afraid my pen was going to catch on fire. I couldn't believe. And it's not that there's like there's 50 of them. It's like it's so hard to grasp that this scene existed before A New Hope when I was a teenager. You know what I mean? Like even now, I'm still amazed. Like, man, this is crazy. Okay, so as you said before, the deal is with the finale is that the bombers need to go down a certain distance, run along a very treacherous terrain that's windy and whatnot, very close to the surface, reach a certain point
exactly
to drop a circular bomb
right.
that then travels. Now, in Dam Busters, it skips on the water like a stone and then hits the wall gently and sinks and explodes. But it has to travel, sink, and explode. Okay, if that doesn't sound like A New Hope, then you need to rewatch A New Hope. But what's funny is when you're going in, they go through all right, let's call everyone's name out, and they cut to all the planes, like, here a wing leader, here a wing leader, here a wing leader, going through. And one of them guys named Hutch, which I thought was very interesting.
Right.
It's which is short for Hutchinson. So you got a guy, and Porkins, later in the trench sequence, actually comments, he says, lost Tyree, lost Hutch, going in, whatever. And I thought, like, oh, it's very cool that they plucked the name Hutch. So the fact that Luke is like, oh, no, it's not Dam Busters, that's a load of hooey. Also, as they're approaching the first dam, what does someone say? Look how big it is. Which I found very interesting. Followed by,
how many guns do you think there are, Trevor? I say there's about 10 guns. Some in the field and some in the towers.
No one says, you worry about the ties, I'll worry about the towers. But, like, it definitely is there. Okay, so they established there's guns. The towers, these guns, fire at them as they're flying towards the dam.
Right.
Very Death Star trench.
Yes.
Very Death Star trench. How do they navigate the river? They navigate navigate the river by putting two, and this is, first of all, just brilliant. Yeah. But they're flying at night.
No, they're right.
They're flying
Let's
at
keep
night.
in mind, they're at night. There's no such thing as night vision. There's no such thing as sophisticated any sort of electronic device to help them to know even how far they are really above the water.
Right.
And they have to be at a very specific speed and height and distance from the target.
Right.
To release
to the bomb at the perfect time.
To hope that it might.
Right.
Yeah.
So they have two ways of doing this, finding that sweet spot, if you will, of when to drop the bomb. And that is, they have two spotlights, actual spotlights casting a white circular light onto the riverbed.
Yeah.
When those two spotlights line up, they're at the right distance, I think, from the river. Like it's 60 feet, I believe, right?
Yeah.
They're at the right distance. While they're getting those spotlights together to line up, the pilot's raising the ship up and down, and they're getting the spotlights. You're hearing things like steady.
Yeah.
Steady.
They're calling out the speed.
Yeah, right. And it's very much like, like in the trench, like steady, steady. So line up. But not only that, you've got the guy who's got his finger on the button to drop the bomb. He has, in Dam Busters, this handheld targeting device, not a targeting computer, that he's lining up two towers. He's looking through an eye hole. It's like basically like a big Y, where at the base of the Y is right on his eye.
Yes.
And at the tips of the Y, two arms of the Y, are two metal points that line up with the towers of the dam, which is, again, just that alone is super cool in and of itself without Star Wars. But you keep having the shots of this guy with his finger on the button, looking through this hole, looking through this targeting device, and waiting for the lines to match up. So when you're watching A New Hope and they're looking through their targeting computer, and there's that great 2D grid, and the lines are coming in left and right, and they're coming in, and they have to hit that certain point, it is so much like the Dam Busters. Yeah. Very, 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 very cool.
And, Chris, you didn't mention that the first one
doesn't work.
Impacts on the surface.
Oh, my gosh. And
they don't say it, but that's what happens.
And what's beautiful about the scene in the Dam Busters is they drop the bomb, right?
Yeah.
It skims along. It hits the dam. But then where do they put the camera? It's very cool. They put the camera all over the plane, mind you, because there's different people in the bomber. But you're kind of shooting across the two pilots in the front canopy, out their canopy window. So you're seeing, this miniature landscape down there. So they're looking down at the landscape, and you see the bomb explode, and there's the false excitement. If we did it, but then it settles, and they realize they didn't do it.
Because these are huge reservoir dams that the attack occurred in May of 43 at a time when the water level was at its highest.
Right.
So really, they're attacking the side where the water is, but they're looking at the side, which is just the huge face of the dam, waiting to see if they breach.
And even that, just that fact, because they mention in, I guess, the midpoint of the Dam Busters, they're like, okay, we've developed this bomb. When do we have to do it? Well, we have to do it in May because that's when the water's the highest. And I forget how far out they are from May. I think it's 2 months. And there's some type exactly. There's not a lot of time, so it's a very short distance. So there's this pressure of we have to do it now. Yeah. And that pressure is also in A New Hope. Why? Because the Death Star's coming down on the planet Yavin, or the moon, Yavin moon, and it's got to clear the main planet.
Right.
And, there's been people that have debated that too. Like, why does it have to clear the main planet? It just has to. But there's this great pressure of time. Like, it has to be now. This has to work now,
Yeah.
And I thought that was cool. And then you have the whole run. The first bomb misses, and the fact that the first bomb misses is beautiful because you think at this point it's going to work. They've been through the trials of that, and that's what makes A New Hope cool. Like,
right.
The first bomb doesn't work.
The interesting thing too, Chris, in the Dam Busters, each wave of attack was with 3 bombers, and you look at the runs on the Death Star, and it's
always
3 X-wings, 3 Y-wings.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
It's very cool. And what's interesting too is like after the first bomb fails, right, and you have that whole like rise of excitement, realization you didn't get it, and whatnot. The next line you hear is, they're talking about their next run, and someone's like, "I'll draw a flak during your run," which is totally like the second time. Like, I'll go in and I'll cover you and blah blah blah, and it just keeps building. And when you're in this point in Dam Busters, what got me was like, okay, this is already more than enough to tie it to Star Wars. Like, it's accomplished its digging Star Wars worthiness and whatnot. But all the views that are happening of the miniature landscape in the Dam Busters, and I gotta say, for miniatures that day and age, they're not bad. Like, they are not bad at all.
They never tell Gibson until the very last possible minute what they're going to be attacking.
Mm-hmm.
So they're training and training and training, flying these things low over the ocean, dropping bombs, practicing. They don't know what it's for. When they finally inform him and they inform the others, they have these miniatures for them to study.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think those are the same miniatures that they shot? Because they were really detailed. I thought
they may be. That's funny you should mention that.
Unless they made a larger size, but they were so detailed. I thought, I wonder if those are the ones that they shot.
Yeah, they very well may be. They're great. And my point of bringing up the miniatures is that the way they shot them in those night scene battles is very, very similar to the way the miniatures of the Death Star surface was shot. Yeah. When you saw ships go down and hit the surface, when you saw the dogfight over the surface, like, there's a lot of shots across the pilot, like it's almost perpendicular to the pilot, and he looks away from camera, and then you see his point of view looking down, and that's how Dam Busters it was shot. Was you see the pilot look, you see his point of view, like would be through the canopy,
right?
And you do see bombers going down in Dam Busters and hitting the ground, the countryside, and exploding into a ball of flame, and it looks a lot like the way the X-wing fighters hit the Death Star. They're so similar. They're so similar how that's shot, and I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, like when you see those explosions, it's pretty cool. And what's great about it is you're in the battle, right? You're riding alongside the guys in Dam Busters. You're seeing how they're attacking these dams. You're seeing the failures as well as the successes. And what is great about that, in its connection to A New Hope, is you're sitting with the pilots and it's unfolding, but then they cut back to Wallace and the military brass in a room with a huge chalkboard with all the names.
Right.
And every time they lose a fighter, it's the youngest guy in the room's poor job. They'll go up there and write the name of the soldiers or the plane that went down and failed. And it is so much like Princess Leia and Dodonna back on Yavin, listening to the battle. And you always had those guys go up to those clear glass walls and putting specs on them, and you're like, "What the hell? What does that mean?"
Yeah.
But that's another nod to, like, this is how warfare is done. When you're in the field, you're in it. You're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
But for every shot, for every moment that the viewer is riding shotgun with these guys, so to speak, you're transported back to the safe headquarters, where the people that make decisions and important people are monitoring this. And it's great that in Dam Busters, it's a phone call, it's a radio, it's a telegraph, it's some type of electronic message coming in. And in A New Hope, Lucas made a very conscious decision to have people listening to the battle. And when you think about A New Hope, like, they got holograms and it's science fiction, they have all this technology. And it's really cool that it's back to that old type of warfare of listening. And even Ben Burt said, like, they took, like shortwave radios.
I was just going to say that one of my, even from way back when, that was one of my most favorite audio aspects of Star Wars is that conversation between the pilots, between the ground, and the distortion and how hard it is. And I just thought that was brilliant. And I would recommend anyone, if you haven't listened to that commentary where they talk about
on the Blu-ray
how they did that on the Blu-ray, listen to it because it's really cool.
Again, that's the reason we picked this film. There's just so many connections to
much better than one scene in Lawrence of Arabia. Thank
well,
you, which was great.
But it's Lawrence of Arabia for crying out loud.
I know.
All right, but there's a lot of stuff, and I'm sure I forgot stuff. But do you have more? Do you want to share?
Chris Mich, I honor the title of digging Star Wars. So when you say to me, "Hey, come on, be on the show," I start digging, and I dig and I dig and I dig for a greater podcast. And here's what I got for you. Now, the first one is almost a gimme because almost any British film made from the 40s onward is going to have makeup done by Stuart Freeborn.
Wow.
As this film does, and he's credited.
Didn't even think about that.
Stuart Freeborn, creator of Yoda, and Chewbacca, and a bunch of other things. So that's easy. But let me tell you about a guy named Peter Alexander Diamond, not credited in this film. But he was an English actor who had trained at RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and worked primarily for many, many years as a stuntman. Okay? Some of the other films he appeared in, there was a British comedy series called Carry On. He was in a lot of those. He was in From Russia with Love.
Oh,
he was in An American Werewolf in London. He had the role of Iman Fasil in Highlander, and he was in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is another one of your favorites.
Right.
But that's not all, Chris Mich. In The Dam Busters, he is seen as a gunner, briefly in scenes at the airbase as the men prepare for their mission, but his more prominent appearance is about 92 minutes into the film as the second wave of bombers approach the Dutch coast. I think it's right about the same time you hear the first utterance of enemy coast ahead, the name of the
right
book. So as they cut to the cockpit, you can see this guy, and he is on the left of the frame. Okay. And he's focused on the task ahead. He doesn't have a line, but he's looking ahead, and he's pretty intent. Now, I don't know. I'm going to watch Chris's head explode here. This is going to be great. I don't know which is more impressive. He was the stunt supervisor who choreographed the fight between Vader and Kenobi in A New Hope. Okay. Now, that was filmed before the two characters ever actually met in the film. So he had to create a unique style because Lucas didn't want broadswords and he didn't want fencing. He wanted something in between. Mm-hmm. The filming of that took a little longer than anticipated because he said David Prowse was heavy-handed and he kept breaking the thin blade in battle. Okay? Peter Diamond is the Tusken Raider that attacks Luke.
Oh. Are you kidding me?
I am
How?
not, my friend.
How did you find that? Is
it Star Wars?
Is it a credited role? Like on A New Hope?
It is not. Not that I've seen.
Okay.
It may be, but I don't think it is.
Okay.
But the usual websites, and I actually got to one of his websites. But he plays the Tusken Raider who attacks Luke Skywalker. And the interesting thing about it was that when they rehearsed it, he was the only stunt guy in Tunisia, right? When they went and shot there. They rehearsed the scene just in clothes. Like they didn't have the outfits because they had to choreograph it. Right. And he said to Lucas, well, who's going to do this? And Lucas said, well, you're the only stunt guy here. You have to do it. So when they rolled the cameras and he had the mask on, he couldn't see anything. So he was attacking Luke, and in that shot of Luke on the ground
with the gaffy stick coming down.
Yeah, he looks pretty terrified. That's because the guy doing the stick couldn't see him. Now, I find that hard to believe because wouldn't they just do a pickup
without, because you only see the stick right here.
Right. But I don't know. It's a good story. Yeah. Now, that's not his only appearance. But that's pretty good, right?
Oh, yeah.
So he's also a character named Garouf Lafaux. I don't know.
Sure.
But he's standing in profile in the Cantina bar.
Oh, is he smoking the long cigarette?
He may be. I'm not sure about. But he's just witnessed Ben using a lightsaber to chop off the arm.
Yeah, we need to look that up.
And we'd like to give a shout out to the Moss Isley Cantina for providing our food and beverages tonight. The Moss Isley Cantina might cost you an arm, but it won't cost you a leg. And then he's outside. He's snitching to one of the stormtroopers on patrol, as you know, when they're, I guess, either outside the docking bay or in the cantina, telling them where they are. And then he's a Death Star trooper on the Death Star in detention block AA-23 who gets hit in the chest and falls down.
Wow.
Right? And he played the stormtrooper
Dear God.
who is shot off the ledge when Luke and Leia are...
Does he do the Screaming Wilhelm?
He gets the Screaming Wilhelm.
Oh,
So-
that's awesome.
And finally, he was one of Jabba's gangster henchmen in the original scene with Han that was restored later.
Right.
And Diamond said that he had appeared at least 15 times in the film, and that he and his two stuntmen, Reg Harding and Colin Skeeping, did so many falls they were referred to as the 3 Star Wars Stooges.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. You've got wow. That's incredible.
And just because it's you, Chris Mich, I can tell you also that in your favorite Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi, he played a character called the Light Man, who was set to be in Jabba's palace menagerie, but it was, of course, cut. And the only time it ever has sort of come to light is there's a behind-the-scenes photo that was in the 2004 DVD that you can find of Mr. Diamond.
Wow. Why would they cut that? It's pretty cool.
I don't know.
All right.
'Cause it looks like a guy wearing a bunch of light bulbs, probably.
I'm blown away. Like the fact that you did such a great job, and then you bring Mark in, which Mark's insights were wonderful, and something I never even dreamt of touching upon, and I'm so glad that was part of it. Yeah, very, very cool. And then and this stuff with Peter Diamond, holy cow, that's pretty amazing. And
I dig Star Wars.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. When I was trying out the names for this podcast back in the day, you were kind of like, really digging Star Wars?
Well, whatever I tell you, Chris, do the opposite.
Well, I'm
That
not.
goes for
I'm not
anyone
saying to
else
win
on
anything.
Earth.
I think if they were scoring this podcast at home, I did not win. But
Are you done? Because I got more.
yeah.
No, I don't.
No, that's awesome, and that's really cool. More the reason to watch Dam Busters.
Yeah, by all means, watch Dam Busters. May I just read the last paragraph from the BFI screen online?
Sure.
I think it really summarizes the significance of Dam Busters. It is testament to Anderson's authoritative, quiet guidance that the performances are largely realistic and multidimensional. The end of the film might, in other hands, be an opportunity for jingoistic flag-waving, but instead Anderson emphasizes the human cost of war without falling into sentimentality.
Yeah, that's well put. It really affects you,
Yeah.
because you spent time with these guys,
Right.
As a viewer, but you spend
Right.
time with them in the mess hall
Yeah.
and in the training, and that is the mark of a good filmmaker,
Yeah.
when you feel like you belong
Yeah.
to people on the screen.
He certainly did justice to the men who served in that, and even I thought it was a great scene in the film where Wallace, after the fact, says to Gibson, talking about the people lost, if he had known it would have been that many, he wouldn't have done it. And Gibson says, but even if they knew, they would have.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. It's amazing. It's based on the true events of the war, and it was just because it's just a great story.
Yeah.
It's and I guess that's why it's is as endearing and continues from generation to generation of being a film of importance.
Yeah.
And
Inspiration.
and it's wonderful that we were able to talk about it. So with that, I want to thank Mark Forshaw again for his time today and for sharing. And holy cow, Peter Fey, I don't know what to say to you other than, like, you the man. Like, that was awesome.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and not only did Peter do his fair share of homework, he was kind enough to let us record in his studio. He recorded the great music you've heard within this episode, and he's he cut this episode, which that's what I try to do with Digging Star Wars. Is it's not just me; it's definitely a film geek community type thing. And you know, props to you. Thank you so much for being part of this.
My pleasure. So what's next, Chris Mich?
Our next film that we're going to talk about in the Digging Star Wars series is a film from 1938 known as Test Pilot that stars Clark Gable. So I hope that you keep coming back to diggingstarwars.blogspot.com. Look for that episode within a month's time. And as always, thank you for listening. Please post a comment. And if you have difficulty posting on our website for some reason, you can find us on Facebook, SoundCloud.com. Of course, our episodes are on YouTube. You can post a comment there, or you can email them to me at diggingstarwars@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch up with you next time.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mich Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.